All right, so it's been a while since I've done a fireside chat. I kind of slacked off this summer and enjoyed beautiful Prince Edward Island. But this week I'm in New York City for Anthos Day. I'm here with Mark Chmarny from Google on the Knative and Cloud Run team. So
Hi, everyone.
we found a corner of the beautiful Google office in New York City. We just had a
Chelsea.
coffee. Yeah, we're in Chelsea. I thought it'd be cool to have a chat about all things serverless, Knative, Cloud Run, all the stuff that's going on this week. So maybe give a quick intro yourself and what you've been working
Sure
on these
thing.
days.
Yeah, so I've been working on Knative pretty much from the inception at Google. It seems like a little over two, maybe 2.5 years. I've been working as a technical program manager. The role kind of spans multiple areas in Google, but I've been focused specifically on our serverless offerings running on Kubernetes. That includes Cloud Run now, which is based on Knative, as well as the Knative project itself.
Cool. Yeah, I remember. I think it was just under 2 years ago I met you and some of the team in Seattle for the first
Yeah.
time, and Weston introduced me to you guys and was like, "Come talk to the Knative team." And at the time, I'd heard about
What?
it. Yeah. So I did a course. I did a little research the night before and I read up on some of the stuff that was going on in the community. I was like, "This is some pretty cool stuff." And a lot of it was around serverless,
Yeah.
and that was part of the thing I was trying to wrap my head around is, what part is serverless, what isn't, what do we mean by the serverless piece? And I think we had a good chat that day just about the capabilities. And to me, I thought it was a lot about developer experience and bringing that experience to developer and getting them out of like the YAML and dealing with Kubernetes all the time and letting them write code. And I think it's come a long way since then. So what was
Yeah,
the
yeah.
original thought when you guys were putting this together? Because it's cool to be able to see something when it was really small and not
Uh-huh.
many people knew about it. And now yesterday at the event, we're showing really cool stuff with Cloud Run and customers are getting super
No, it's
excited.
exciting for sure. I think when we first started looking at that, at the space of kind of enabling developers on Kubernetes to be more efficient and kind of help them build application without worrying about their underlying infrastructure. First of all, we were bringing a lot of experience that Google already had in that space. I mean, if you look back at probably 11 years now, maybe 12, when Google App Engine has launched.
Yeah.
And clearly it wasn't called serverless at the time because we couldn't come up with such a cool name, obviously. But it was really solving a lot of the same problems that I think developers want to be the platform to solve for them. So that was a good set of learnings that Google could bring to the table. But at the same time, we were looking across the entire landscape of open source project. And I remember clearly kind of putting together a spreadsheet of different offerings that are out there. And at that time was probably 13 different open source projects that have different approaches, but basically we're doing the same thing on top of Kubernetes. They were doing a lot of things around building an image, a lot of things around scaling that image at runtime based on requests, and then dealing with what I think a lot of people associate with serving, which is with serverless, which is event-based programming. And when we kind of stepped back, we said, okay, if these are the common set of problems that developers have on top of Kubernetes when they develop applications, why don't we build a platform that does that? And the idea of Knative was born, as every other projects in the world. We clearly did not start with the right name. I think we had 3 names before that. But eventually we ended up on Knative and started socializing that with a number of different partners. Companies like SAP and Pivotal and Red Hat and IBM and many others. And in the process kind of started formalizing exactly what Knative is and settling very quickly on a set of components that would be able to be reused by a number of people to build different types of products on it. So 2 years later, we have a number of commercial offerings now that are in a marketplace, including Google Cloud Run, that is offered both as a fully managed offering on top of Google, as well as Google Cloud on top of Kubernetes, which is offered as part of Anthos, as well as the platform that spans both Google and on-prem offerings. So
Yeah, that's just announced too, right?
yeah, just yesterday. Still getting used to all the naming of Anthos, Cloud Run, and Anthos. But yeah, it's basically the exact same programming model, the exact same control plane APIs that allow developers to kind of not worry where that code is going to be running and worry about how to kind of use the experience that they already have writing Go, Node.js, Python, I don't know what else is out there, applications. And when they build that as an image, that image can run on any of the places where Knative compatible APIs run, including many services that are not even offered by Google. Red Hat, OpenShift, IBM's platform has it. Pivotal has a compatible API. So there's a lot of options to kind of run Knative compatible software.
Awesome. So you mentioned a couple other vendors in that space, some big ones. So how did the whole open source community come about? And it's not easy building a community, especially when you could argue that some of them are your competitors and getting everyone on the bus. And it seems like the community is really strong. Like I follow the Slack channel. There's a lot of good chatter and good debate on things there. And we're getting to the point where past 1.0 is going to come pretty quickly. But how did the community come about? And the easiest thing to do is just go build a product and bring it to market. But the community is really important, and I'm amazed at the velocity of it, the collaboration, and everything that's going on in that space.
No, it's I'm happy you kind of mentioned this, because I think clearly Google probably couldn't have done this all by ourselves. First of all, today actually marks the time where we have released the 0.9 release of Knative.
Right.
I'm not sure publicly landed when we're recording this, but by the time you watch it, it will be already out there. I think that represents about something like 7,000 different PRs that landed. Wow. 55 different companies are contributing code to it. And I think when we look back and how we were able to build that community, it was about two things mainly. One is just predictable releases that take into consideration user feedback. So as we were socializing Knative project, even though it was still private and open only to a few of the companies I mentioned before, that were our launch partners, we already were taking in their feedback around the features and capabilities that we were building there. So that demonstrated an ability to, a willingness to be responsive and kind of address real needs. The other ones we were public, I think the community has grown phenomenally, mainly because it truly solves problems that people have in real life. Yeah. It wasn't a esoteric conversation about how to do serverless. It was, what do people need to be successful? And once you kind of move away from the underlying infrastructure, developers are, one thing I would never bet against is just the creativity of developers. They will build stuff that it just blows your mind.
Yeah, and to get them away from, I did a talk yesterday and we talked a lot about just getting developers back to developing, moving to cloud. A lot of times they were in enterprises. Yeah. They were having to go build all the infrastructure, deal with all the load balancing, network security, because they were wanting to move fast. And now just releasing them from all of that infrastructure wrangling and building, and just letting them develop and get an image built and then run it, deal with things like auto scaling, scale to zero.
That's right, yeah.
All those kind of features. You kind of got into some of the talking about the use cases drove a lot of the community and solving the problem. So it's like, what's the problem we're trying to solve? Let's build something. Do you want to talk about some of the more interesting use cases? And I think some of the stuff I've been hearing from customers and just even dreaming up, taking some legacy stuff like batch processes, using the eventing or the serving pieces of that. Do you want to talk about a few different pieces of Knative and what Cloud Run's going to bring to the table?
Yeah, obviously it's really hard to kind of stack rank these in any given sense. There's a number of customers who have predominantly one or the other or a combination thereof. So don't take this as an indication of kind of importance or something. But the common things that we often see, they're frankly not unique to serverless or anything like that. They're just, we refer to them as common day two problems. You come to a conference, you hear about this cool new framework or cool new platform, you build this hello world thing, and let's say it actually did something meaningful, and suddenly you have users. And you find out, I mean, clearly you would never do that, but I find out I have a bug, for example, and I would need to update the application. How do you update a live application? The whole concept of a blue-green or black-red, whatever you want to call it. I'm colorblind, so I'm not sure exactly which one's which. But the idea is that you transparently, kind of in opaque way, migrate traffic to a brand new version that's validated. And that's a very common problem, regardless of what type of applications you build. From day one, Knative and the products that are built on top of it, like Cloud Run, came with the notion that the runtime is one part of that, but you also need some awareness around network management and kind of transport and traffic splitting and stuff like that. We've, from the day one, kind of used Istio as an implementation that allowed us to kind of deal both with the ingress as well as egress. But since then, Knative actually now supports a number of other gateways and mesh networks. So I think that's pretty well-established pattern. I think once you have the capability to split traffic, you start looking into more complex situations, something like a canary pattern where you want to split maybe send about 2% of your traffic to validate assumption. Maybe it's performance, maybe it's user behavior. The one that I use commonly, and colleagues of mine laughing about all the time, is a marketing campaign. Where
I was going to say ads and stuff, placing them in certain spots, doing analytics on that.
The button, moving the button, and demonstrating how big of an impact on user success rate with regards to registering for a campaign. It's my go-to example that I always demonstrate. It's probably very minimalistic, but it does a good job kind of articulating the problems that we're trying to solve.
Yeah, well, just think of, we'll say the olden days, but they aren't that, like, a couple years ago or even last year. To do that, a marketing, a CMO wants to go and say, okay, what's the best way we're going to get traction on this? Like, even think like a bank wants to get like a credit card ad out or someone to sign up for something. Who knows where the best place is to put it? When should it come up? Right when you sign in? Should it come up later? So, to do that would be a project, a release. People got to wake up on Sunday and do, deployments and things. And now this idea of just being able to experiment and very like low risk experiment, put out something, get the data, the telemetry on it, and then be able to make a decision and then slowly wait it over. I could even see things like, regional stuff for different countries. They would want different types of things.
Geopolitical concerns come into play all the time. Being able to kind of validate that especially when you're dealing with multilingual deployments, how is the responsiveness, especially like countries like Canada, for example, as you can probably testify to, which has bilingual, being able to support that is often very critical. And, just literally a couple hours ago, I was talking to a customer, a large enterprise financial company that wanted something like that, but once they saw an ability to do this kind of marginal traffic validation and then not have to back up, but continue with this is successful once they have the metrics to support the decision, and go on and do this on an ongoing basis, maybe 10 times a day sometimes. It was like eye-opening to them and freeing, because now their developers never have to write a line of code other than including some of the telemetry that they maybe wanted to see. They really did not have to do anything special that was specific for Knative.
Yeah, and what team, a lot of our customers are kind of siloed a little bit. There's always the day ones, the fun stuff, get it built, get it installed. Then you mentioned day two, which is not just about like fixing things that are broken. It's about steering traffic, making decisions on waiting, scaling up, scaling down. Where do you see the kind of delineation point between when the implementation's done and then maybe the marketing team wants to do some of these traffic shapings? Do you see it more as we do a lot of stuff with more of a GitOps approach. So I can picture, you have a repo, someone in the market team is able to do a PR, they're able to change a couple waiting rules, and then they can submit that, it gets approved, and it gets pushed out. Like I said, there's no one jumping on command line of a cluster and running commands. So it's a bit liberating, I think, for other teams to get involved in the pipeline of releasing applications and not just be up to the operations team.
No, I think that's an excellent point. I think the idea of something like a GitOps or something like that is often intimidating, because you think that this is full of developers who work in a console and they never see a day of light. That's actually not the case. We see increasingly the concept of kind of a federated distribution of code, where people work in the environment where they're comfortable. They commit code or commit even UIs and copy that goes into the UI as an artifact into a repository, and the automation behind the scene takes on and does the validation, compliance checking, security checking, and so forth, and then does the actual deployment, but does it on an ongoing basis over and over many times a day. That is percolating through companies who suddenly are finding themselves much more free to make more incremental changes versus waiting for this Tuesday, or
3 months
if you're lucky, on
that.
Tuesday. If you're not lucky, then it's the first day of month or something. So absolutely, we see that happening, and it's actually no longer just the ops people. We see a lot of blend of teams, and probably not enough data yet to kind of find a very global patterns. Although Google has recently released a nice DevOps report, that actually does put some data behind it, and it took a number of years to do it. But in my experience, it really, we see a variety of customers who do a number of things, and depending what works for them, you really can prescribe a culture.
Yeah.
And on the end of the day, DevOps is a culture within a company.
Yeah, there's a lot of, we call it culture conditioning involved to get people on the bus. Maybe talk about, a lot of this stuff is HTTP based. Do we see an opportunity for non-HTTP stuff to fall under Knative?
Absolutely. So Knative already supports gRPC.
Yeah.
And we have a number of demos around that. I think the challenge starts when you start talking about other protocols like streaming protocols like gRPC in the context of auto-scaling.
Yeah.
So when do you stop scale the workloads down to zero? When client disconnect or when the client doesn't use the connection?
Yeah.
And both can have kind of a good use cases behind them. So it's not that we don't have the technology. gRPC is already enabled, so is WebSockets. It's about how do you do that in a platform that is intrinsically stateless and intrinsically auto-scaling.
Yeah. Yeah, and another use case I think we see is a lot of people are just, the batch is still very big and out there, and, a lot of mainframe type stuff. But we also, I think people have packed a lot of stuff into virtual machines that just sit there and watch and wait for an event. It takes up a lot of infrastructure, especially if you're a customer or if your customers are, not multi-tenant. So you're building a platform for each of them, and then you have virtual machines, and you need to make them redundant. You need extra sites. So licenses on top of that, patching, maintenance. The scale gets pretty big. So I think getting the word out. One of the use cases I want to dive into is just some of these eventing type use cases, and using Knative to be able to have a cluster that's just sitting there to deal with some of these events. I think the interesting part is, how do you trigger them? What recommendations?
No, I'm glad you mentioned this. So Knative includes a number of different area of concern, like projects, and serving is the one we've so far been talking about here, which is around auto-scaling, traffic management, and so forth. And we often kind of forget about the other components of that. And Knative eventing has been there pretty much from day one, but it kind of evolved at a different pace just because the series of concerns were slightly higher. What we seeing right now is people kind of starting recognizing the value of that. And the use case you mentioned around number of VMs having to sit there and keep checking or maybe polling on a particular process. Do you have anything for me? Do you have anything for me? Do you have anything for me? In meanwhile, is spinning utilization and cycles, and not being able to use that cluster for more important workloads is the number one kind of a light goes on for companies type of use case that we've seen. With Knative eventing, first of all, Knative eventing comes out of the box, so to speak, if there was a box, with a pretty large number of existing event sources. So you can bring those. I think we've renamed them recently to importers, because apparently renaming components is important in open source project. But those importers are existing ones that you can kind of look through the catalog and say, hey, I would like one for SQS on Amazon, or I don't know, for GitHub webhooks or something like that. And what that allows you to do is install it inside of Knative and configure it with your credentials, your information, with your configuration, and then use that as a source of events that you can trigger to the auto-scaling service.
Right.
So a couple of things happen. First, if you have this low utilization kind of event broker sitting there that's able to capture the events and invoke the scaling service when they're required. And then you have that service that actually doesn't have to even be alive until it's being called upon. Besides those, 20, 30 event sources that we have now, there is also probably 3 or 4 now patterns for how to extend that. Some of them are very robust around kind of proper CRDs within Kubernetes, and you can build those and build the entire lifecycle where events are. So some of them are actually, hey, I don't know Kubernetes and I still want to build a source. We have a container source that you're basically building a normal container, and you just invoke in your configuration file, you define the type of source that should be used to wire that event to. What that frees people to do is suddenly they can stitch them together. One of the demos that I like to show is this complex pipeline that includes a number of different steps, whether it's language translation, some kind of NLP about sentiment analysis, Twitter sources and stuff. Frankly, each one of those steps is irrelevant. You can replace it with any one of them. But what we want to demonstrate is the ability to build complex pipelines that are kind of using each other as an input-output pattern. And you can kind of start creating pretty robust set of pipelines that have, which frankly people could have done a long time ago, but what Knative enables you to do that in a very declarative manner. So if one of those workloads is replaced by, died or crashed or something, when it comes back, is guaranteed to respond to the state that you desire to be.
Yeah. Cool. And I think it's getting pretty interesting. Like I tested out with some of the team a couple months ago, Cloud Run on GKE on our VMware stack, the Anthos GKE, and it was pretty flawless to get up and running. Took me 15 minutes, and I was able to go through the open source use cases and be able to demo it at an event. And we've had some conversations around, well, serverless, what's it mean on-prem? We already bought the infrastructure. We have a VMware cluster. We're running that stuff. Why scale to zero? And I think you hit on it there is, we're always going to have stuff that needs to spin up and run. But if it's done off an event, then you can imagine, like, let's say the event happens like 20 times a day and you stagger that out, you can start to pack an awful lot into a cluster and not waste all those resources that would have been using it. So scale to zero doesn't mean the cluster goes away, but you can get a lot more juice out of your cluster. And then we can start to do sophisticated things like if we're watching it, we can scale another node up if we have a lot of, and then scale the nodes back down.
We do that. We see that pattern frequently. With the latest release of Knative, there is some automation built in where we try to keep the utilization in a certain way that deals with things like cold starts, so it's able to kind of make some resources available for you, but also can be used to trigger additional resource provisioning. And in some environments like Google Cloud, I think we can spin up a new cluster within less than 3 minutes.
Oh yeah.
Some other ones it might take a little longer. But bottom line is you can do that in a very predictive manner because it's not based on a request, but on potential of having that resources required. Bin packing it continues being a art that does not get recognized very much. But when you do it well, the efficiency of your resources is exponentially higher, and therefore you can build a lot more.
Yeah, and then the other use case I think is you've got a certain amount of infrastructure in on-prem, and maybe it's integrating with like a mainframe to help with some of the eventing side of stuff. But then, a retail example or something, an event comes on like Black Friday or Christmas or something, being able to scale that out to cloud, deploy those same images, leverage an ephemeral cluster for a little while, and tear it back down. I think people are getting super interested in that. The challenge with that's always been the networking, but I think Service Mesh and Anthos Service Mesh and some of the stuff Istio brings to the table there, we demoed a lot of that yesterday, and we'll be putting a blog out, but you start to see the possibilities, and I think seeing is believing, and being able to just put a use case up that shows a capability. A lot of these teams and development groups start to brainstorm over lunch and start to come up with these use cases, and the path of trying it is so low. Like they can take an afternoon and build a cluster, get Knative out or get Cloud Run up, and then test something and fail fast, get some ideas.
I'm glad you mentioned it. So a couple of things. First of all, the active provisioning cluster is literally a checking a box now in your on Google Cloud and on Anthos soon. Ability to add that Cloud Run capability to your cluster is very nominal at this point. The use case you mentioned, I get a lot of kidding from my teammates because I keep referring to this as Justin Bieber use case, where Justin Bieber tweets about some pants, your marketing side or your retail side has to respond to request.
Oh, so even less predictable than on a time of year. It can happen at any time.
So it's not even seasonal, which often happens, and we have some use cases around pre-warming resources. In fact, a colleague of mine, Joe, and I did a Kubernetes KubeCon session on these kind of use cases that demonstrates, so you can look it up, that talks about auto-scaling or predictable auto-scaling. In this case, it's actually virtually like a weather comes in and you have to respond to some emergency use cases with additional resources because there are people checking imagery of particular weather area or something like that. That is totally unpredictable, and you're not going to be able to respond with just provisioning some resource. You have to be able to have that. And Knative combined with Istio is able to address that. And I think we've seen some pretty impressive demonstrations yesterday in the Anthos Day.
So we're getting probably up on time, but talk a little bit about Cloud Run. So Cloud Run is Google's, I guess, more opinionated version of what they took out of the open source community. Cloud Run can run on GKE clusters, but it can also run as more of a service and not have to kind of like get into the weeds of that.
Yeah.
And I think it's really the word's getting out on it now, and it's great. Especially this week, we've talked a lot about Anthos, and I think Anthos, when it a year and a half ago, people were thinking, okay, Anthos is this Google's on-prem offering, but what they're getting to see now is it's config management, it's the Istio or the service mesh stack, it's Knative, and then all the Cloud Run stuff. So it's really about the application and getting apps onto these. And to a certain extent, the Kubernetes layer and that is kind of just table stakes at this point in time. But
I mean, it's there, and I think there's a lot of value there, but we definitely don't want it to be a requirement. You do not need to know Kubernetes in order to use Cloud Run.
Right.
So Cloud Run, I think initially was very much just the Google implementation of the open source that we actually continue contributing to and working with the community on. Over time, though, there's a lot of more sugar on top of it. So custom domains, SSL certificate provisioning, logging integration with tracing. There's a lot of goodness there that you get on top of the basic open source Kubernetes Knative components that are actually provisioned and validated around versions and deployed as a single stack.
A lot of the stuff you need when you start to go to production.
Yeah,
people start saying, "Oh, do you have secure services? What else are you doing?"
The part that I definitely would be wrong of me to not mention here is that what Knative does is also kind of codifies the set of control plane APIs. So what we have done is actually went even further than that. We've taken that API and deliver that as a fully managed service, which means that you as a developer never see the underlying cluster, and probably there is no cluster to some degree. You'll have a lot of the same capabilities, exactly same programming model, exactly same control plane, with exactly same tooling, different flags. You say platform equals managed or GKE, but the rest of the way you've developed applications, you can move them back and forth. I think we've demonstrated that next too. So it's really depending what level of control you want to have. Maybe you depend on some accelerators like TPUs or GPUs.
Right, yeah.
There might be a use case for Cloud Run on GKE because we can offer those things. But maybe you don't, and you're looking for super, super fast of auto-scaling capability that does not involve spinning up new VMs.
Right.
You come to Cloud Run managed, and I think we've demonstrated next something to the tune of 1,000 new instances within a minute, like boom, suddenly happens. And the very same way that it comes up, it comes down to like instantaneously. When you're paying only for the combined time that these were executed. Cloud Run Managed also has very clever things around concurrency. So if your application is written in a way that it can process multiple requests concurrently without leaking the information across the different requests, you can get some really interesting cost savings in that space.
Cool, and you can also tack on some authentication on that too, right? If it's not an authenticated connection, it won't spin up. So you can kind of protect your bill from internet facing or internal services. You can make sure are authenticated before you start.
That's right. It can even do. Like one of the things that we often, in traditional development space, you have to deal with is how do you manage credentials? Well, some user password thing. With Cloud Run Managed, we also support full IAM capability. So creating a policy for a certain type of workload that can be executed, you don't even deal with passwords. You just use IAM to validate the request.
Cool. Well, I can tell you there's a lot going on. Obviously, you can tell. The development team who I've got to know, most of them are in Seattle, are top-notch. And
thank you.
It's pretty amazing what they're doing with this. We're doing an event in Toronto early October.
That's right,
I think I'll have to look up the date, but I'll get it out. I'll post the date. We're going to do an event at Google's office. It's going to, I think, be like a half-day morning. Going to do tons of demos, show the power of stuff, and then I think we're going to do more of a Knative community update meetup at our office the next evening. So make sure you check that out. And then any other, you're doing a lot of talks at conferences and stuff, and you've written a lot of good stuff. Anything you want to point people in the right direction?
I probably should have had a list here. I think the next couple interesting events is we have a cloud summit in Atlanta in a week and a half. I think we have one going right now in Seattle, so probably too late for people who are watching this. And the next one is going to be next London, which also we're hoping to hear some interesting news there.
And KubeCon's coming up. So
That's true. San Diego, yes.
Some of the team will be at KubeCon.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, keep an eye out for more stuff. There's lots going on with Knative and Cloud Run, and How will people get started? Maybe point them in. I know there's a Slack channel that I'm on. That's
So
a good place.
the best place I can point people to is knative.dev. That's knativ.dev. From there, you can get to our documentation, to quick launch, quick starts. You can get to the Slack channel. Follow us on Twitter, Knative Project. And I want to really recognize Kyle and the whole Arctiq team for really kind of helping us to expose even broader number of users to it, especially in the enterprise.
Yeah.
It's really exciting time for us here at Knative and the whole serverless community.
Yeah, we got to get the word out because this stuff really helps your business. So it's seeing is believing. So thanks a lot. Thanks for doing this, man. Enjoy the rest. All right, I'll have a few more of these coming out soon. So this one I'm going to get out hopefully in the next day or so. So keep an eye out, and thanks for watching.
Thanks.